Yes, absolutely. And the undeniable fact that intense military operations will be heating up significantly on the Kupyansk front, well, that's an absolute given and a certainty. Since General Gerasimov has already explicitly promised President Putin in advance to completely encircle both Kupyansk and Pokrovsk, Russian soldiers and their commanding officers are fully expected to fulfill this demanding objective at the ultimate cost of their very own lives. These significant promises were made in advance by the Russian chief of the General Staff, a commitment that now weighs heavily upon them. On the Pokrovsk direction, they're throwing in hundreds of thousands. Every day, people are dying on the Kupyansk front, flanking on the offensive, but they can't concentrate right now, and they want both Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka, or Man and Kupyansk as well. They act as if their resources are endless. That's why on the Kupyansk front, the promise was definitely made too early because there's a river there, and it's a very complicated situation to encircle the city, or even not just the city, but a number of settlements from the north and south. They need to establish two bridgeheads. From that northern bridgehead, which they did manage to establish, and through which they were infiltrating Kupyansk, things were happening. This so-called infiltration into the city is obviously not enough to support their forces. And down in the southern regions, they still haven't even now successfully managed to cross the significant river. Or more precisely, in very recent weeks there have been military attempts within the vicinity of Borodyanka to finally secure a foothold on the right bank. But these attempts did not meet with success. Therefore, the fact that our command managed to find reserves, and believe me, reserves are desperately needed everywhere right now, both in the directions of the main attacks and where the enemy is breaking through. Like the southern direction, forces and reserves were found to localize the threat. In the north, in the direction of the occupiers, is a major success for our defenders. We haven't spoken about successful operations in the USSR very often lately. It's tough.
Regarding the Pokrovsk direction, once again, the Russian occupiers have missed yet another deadline there, 10, 20 times already. It's already the end of November, and the defense forces are even achieving some tactical partial successes. I'm talking about the area where they are throwing in the maximum number of people. The defense forces are holding them off, and the Russian occupiers, yes, they rearm and try to attack again, but they are unable to capture the positions of the defense forces. Moreover, I even remember the exact date. In the second week of November, Russian military correspondents claimed that the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Pokrovsk direction were completely under Russian control. But as we can see, it's been almost a month and the logistics are still functioning. The General Staff officially reports that everything is fine in this regard, and the defense forces continue to resist. Could it be that the world's Second Army is once again showing that it's all a fiction, just an information bubble, like those earlier narratives about Putin's invincible army, which, as it turns out, is actually quite beatable, despite having advantages in manpower, equipment, and missiles?
I wouldn't say that logistics in the Pokrovsky direction are fine. Everything is difficult.
This is the official statement from General Staff. Logistics are difficult, but tough.
It's difficult with logistics for us. Everything is hard. And with logistics for the enemy as well. In fact, the skies over Pokrovsky and the Odradivka agglomeration, not just on our side, but more broadly on the enemy's side as well. This is a battlefield for small drone aviation. Both our drones and the enemy's drones. As soon as the thick, swirling autumn fog completely covers the entire area, every single individual immediately tries to regroup their scattered forces, strategically advance their positions, carefully evacuate the wounded personnel to safety, or efficiently supply their waiting troops with essential provisions and necessary equipment. That's how it happens on our side too, and on the Russian side as well. Another issue is their goals and the promises made by the same people. Gerasimov's promises about the encirclement, which have been going on for a month now. Today it's already been 4 weeks, so it's been a month. The promises that Kupyansk is encircled, Pokrovsk, Mirnograd are encircled, none of them have come true. Thousands of Russian soldiers have died during this time. In order to put Gerasimov's plans into action, the Russians are trying with all their might to encircle both Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration, and the Second Army is there as well. They're pressing from the south, from the southwest. The 51st Army is trying to encircle from the north, from the northeast. Let's add there is urban combat. But as for the encirclement, these formidable pincers, these sharp claws, they are actually positioned quite close to each other. However, there is absolutely no true encirclement. Moreover, as I understand it, if things continue like this, if our brigades, which finished off the Dobropilya salient, that enemy bulge, keep operating in the same direction, in the same way, then their strike will be aimed at the flank, at this in the northern Russian pincer. This particular Gerasimov crab might very well end up with its formidable claws completely torn off. On the other hand, the significant pressure that the Russians are currently exerting right now, as I currently perceive and understand it, the most significant and pressing threat is undeniably directed towards Myrnorod. And it is quite evident and clear that a considerable portion of our available forces will inevitably and gradually commence their withdrawal in a westward direction in order to reinforce the defensive flanks, the northern and southern flanks of this defensive stronghold. Please truly excuse the obvious tautology, if you will. I apologize for that.
Pavel, there's another important point here. This is not just a military, but also a political blow to Putin and the Russian army. We've seen, by the way, how Syrskyi, he also spoke about this publicly. He mentioned this earlier regarding the Pokrovsky direction, and now he spoke in the context of Kupyansk, saying that, suspiciously, there are a lot of fakes. Putin himself is spreading them, not Russian propaganda, but Putin personally, saying that in Pokrovsky and Mirnohorod everything is surrounded, that in Pokrovsky Mirnohrad there are 15 battalions and so on, and in Kupyansk everyone is waiting for the order to eliminate and so on. But as practice has shown, this is not true. Could it be that these failures, declared as part of the so-called special military operation, are also a political blow for Putin and his regime?
I don't even know. Is this really a blow to Putin? Already 3 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, 3 or 4 months ago, Putin was saying that they had captured Pokrovsk. More precisely, Gerasimov reported to Putin that Pokrovsk had been captured, and Putin nodded his head during his previous visit to Gerasimov's bunker. 3 months later, Gerasimov tells him to his face that Pokrovsk and Kramatorsk are already surrounded, and Putin doesn't ask him, so did the Ukrainians take them back from us? Did we lose them? No, everything's fine. He goes on to talk about how they're already capturing some Komsomolsk, and the conversation just keeps going, doesn't it? So Putin lied, and then what? Does the Russian people react in any way to the lies of their dictator? Yes, they just sit quietly in their burrows, listening to whatever they're told, excuse me. I think our European partners understand that Putin is lying. The overseas ones probably understand too, but pretend to believe him. That's why Putin lies. Maybe Konashenko sneezed at him. We haven't seen him in a while.
All right, I'd also like to ask, first let me remind you again, because there's a lot of it and it's all very different. There is information that appears which in fact does not correspond to reality. I also refer to the military. The spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, also stated that Russian troops have not entered Huliaipol, Zaporizhzhia region. They were stopped on the approaches to the city. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the enemy does not stop its assaults, but there are no combat clashes in Huliaipol. Search and strike operations are ongoing. So, well, although there aren't any, say, combat clashes today, they could happen tomorrow, right? That's what I want to say. Yes, even just looking at and discussing these directions today, how quickly, how dynamically the tactics of the Russian army are changing. Can we track this? Or, is it more like they have this tactic and for several weeks in a row, as it is, they keep using it, even if it doesn't work, they still keep at it?
Well, basically, they consistently keep using the exact same tactical approach all the time. Another crucial point to consider is that, depending on precisely how we strategically hold our defensive positions, this particular tactic automatically and quite effectively adapts itself to counter the evolving tactics employed by the armed forces of Ukraine, what we now commonly refer to as infiltration tactics, a method involving stealthy penetration and disruption. 2 years ago, that was the tactic of breaking through. Remember, we used to say the Russians are breaking through our defenses in the Avdiivka direction. Why were they breaking through? Because the density of our defense was quite high, and in order to advance, the Russians had to push some of our positions back. Move them by 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters. Now, our defensive line is rather thin, and now they don't have to move our strong points anymore. Instead, they find gaps between them where they can slip through. That's why it's called infiltration tactics. But overall, the nature of the enemy's actions remains the same. And the ratio of infantry assaults to mechanized assaults can change depending on the terrain and the weather. On our anti-tank weapons positioned in the defensive line, and crucially, on how exceptionally well their reconnaissance efforts work, this can significantly change the entire nature of fire support operations. We always talk about FPV drones, about Mavics that illuminate the battlefield, but we often forget to mention air support, especially from the enemy's side. These are the glide bombs that level the playing field. And just look at the number of glide bombs they use. And every day you can see how much it's increasing. This is clearly already a change in tactics. Here, artillery is being supplemented by glide bombs. As soon as there is any activity on our side, in certain areas, glide bombs are sent there. In other words, the enemy's air force is being used to the fullest extent. It's not just Shaheds they're producing. They're also making them in the UAV production complexes. So yes, changes in tactics are happening. But we have to, if we don't adapt to them, they will find a weakness. They adjust their tactics based on ours, so we need to urgently make changes. We need to adapt our tactical methods, because whoever doesn't evolve will lose.
Pavel, and finally, let me also clarify about the missile attacks by the Russian Federation, which it periodically carries out against Ukraine. What could be the red line for Putin to stop attacking? Could it be sanctions or perhaps political pressure? Is there such a thing, in your opinion?
I think if the Kremlin is destroyed along with him, that would be a good red line, a red point. I don't know what could stop Putin. Sanctions, which are aimed at collapsing the Russian economy. What degree of economic collapse of this state is needed for the father to stop drinking? Yes. I really don't know what specific kind of efforts are truly needed. From the outside, does it require persuasion from the American president? So that Putin would say, yes, I'm not aggressive, I'm actually a peacemaker, and agree to some kind of deal. I can't foresee such scenarios. So far, judging by Vladimir Putin's consistent statements, his aggressive actions, and the brutal actions of his military forces, Putin firmly believes he can ultimately achieve complete success through purely military means and overwhelming force. This is already the 4th year since the defeat near Kyiv. He hasn't lost hope, and since he's being told, maybe even convincing himself, that yes, things are bad, but if we just push the Ukrainians a little more, they'll collapse. But the Ukrainians aren't collapsing. Not collapsing, that's the key. That's our main task.